Now, my name is Ronan Merrick, and I've always had an eye for the unusual. When I stumbled upon an online auction for antiques, I felt a thrill rush through me. I wasn't just browsing, I was searching for something extraordinary. Among the usual relics, I found an ornate wooden music box intricately carved with swirling patterns and strange symbols. The seller claimed it was a unique piece from the late 1800s, accompanied by a vague warning about its haunted past. I hesitated. My curiosity pulled me closer. I read the comments from other users. Some warned against bidding, while others shared ghost stories they'd heard about similar items. I brushed off the warnings as urban legends. I had to have it. I placed my bid, heart racing with anticipation. The notification came through just a few days later. I had won. I was elated, envisioning my new acquisition sitting proudly on my shelf, a conversation starter, a piece of history. I couldn't wait to see it in person. When the music box arrived, it was more beautiful than I had imagined. The craftsmanship was exquisite, the wood polished to a shine that reflected the dim light of my living room. As I ran my fingers over the carvings, I felt a strange chill, a sensation I brushed off as excitement. I placed it on my desk, feeling proud of my find. That night, curiosity got the better of me. I decided to wind it up. As the music filled the air, an eerie melody unfolded, haunting and beautiful. But as I listened, a sense of dread crept in, like the box was revealing secrets I wasn't ready to hear. Suddenly, the lights flickered, plunging my room into darkness. "What the hell?" I muttered, fumbling for my phone. I dismissed the power outage as a coincidence, but a feeling nagged at me, whispering that the music box was somehow to blame. I turned it off, dismissing it as an oddity, and headed to bed. The next few days were unsettling. My life began to unravel in subtle yet profound ways. I lost my job unexpectedly, my boss citing irreconcilable differences. My longtime girlfriend, Lena, suddenly stopped answering my texts and calls. Friends began to pull away, avoiding me for reasons I couldn't fathom. One night, desperate for solace, I wound the music box again, hoping the melody would bring back some semblance of normalcy. As the tune played, I noticed a reflection in the darkened window behind me, an indistinct figure. My heart raced. I turned quickly, but there was nothing. Just the faint outline of the trees swaying outside. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Every time I glanced at the music box, it seemed to emit a sinister energy, whispering secrets just out of reach. The walls of my apartment felt like they were closing in, shadows dancing around me. I felt trapped in a web spun by the cursed object. Days turned into weeks, and my life spiraled further into chaos. My health began to deteriorate. I couldn't eat or sleep properly. I started experiencing vivid nightmares that felt hauntingly real. I dreamt of the music box, of a ghostly figure with hollow eyes watching me, and an endless void where my future should be. One evening, I sat in my living room, trembling as I stared at the music box. I decided enough was enough. I had to rid myself of this cursed object. I grabbed it, but as I did, a cold wind swept through the room, extinguishing the candles I had lit. The atmosphere thickened, the air heavy with foreboding. As I opened the door to throw it out, a voice echoed in my mind, soft yet insistent, "You can't escape me." Staggered back, dropping the box, and it hit the floor with a resounding thud. The music began to play on its own, a chilling melody that filled the room with an ominous energy. I was done running. I had to confront whatever this was. With trembling hands, I picked up the music box, staring into its depths as the music played. Suddenly, the figure from my nightmares manifested in front of me, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. Panic surged through me, but I stood my ground. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice breaking. The figure remained silent, but its presence grew stronger, an overwhelming sense of despair washing over me. In that moment, I understood the music box wasn't just an object. It was a vessel of sorrow, a keeper of lost souls. "Release me," it finally whispered, the voice echoing with pain. "You hold the key." I knew what I had to do. I took a deep breath and opened the compartment of the music box, revealing a small piece of parchment inside, worn and faded. I unfolded it, revealing a series of names, those who had owned the box before me. Each name was followed by a date of death, all far too young. Tears streamed down my face as I realized the truth. The music box fed on despair, trapping the souls of its owners, ensuring they would never escape its grasp. I understood that breaking the cycle required more than just throwing it away. I had to acknowledge its pain. With newfound resolve, I whispered into the darkness, "I'm sorry. I spoke to the figure, recognizing its sorrow and desperation. "I will help you find peace." As I said those words, the air began to shift. The figure's expression softened, and the room filled with a warm light. The music slowed, the melody transforming from a haunting tune to something soft and soothing. The figure began to dissolve into a cascade of light, and I felt an overwhelming sense of calm envelop me. "I'm free," it whispered, a gentle smile forming on its ethereal face. As the last echoes of the music faded, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The shadows in the room receded, and the oppressive atmosphere dissipated. The music box fell silent, its curse broken. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter. The nightmares had stopped, and my life began to realign. Lena reached out, apologizing for her distance, and I found a new job, one that felt right. The music box, now just a beautiful relic, sat quietly on my shelf, a reminder of the darkness I had faced and overcome. Hey, my name is Evelyn Hart, and I've always had a fascination with the past, particularly my family's history. After my grandmother passed away, I inherited several boxes of her belongings, including old home movies. They were recorded on dusty Voss tapes, forgotten relics of a time when life seemed simpler. As I rummaged through the boxes in my dimly lit basement, an old camera caught my eye, a vintage camcorder that looked like it had seen better days. Curiosity piqued. I grabbed the tapes in the camera, determined to relive the memories of my childhood. I set up the camera in my living room, connecting it to the old TV I had just purchased. The screen flickered to life, revealing grainy footage of family gatherings, birthday parties, and sunny afternoons in the backyard. I laughed at the innocence of it all, my family's laughter echoing in my mind. But just as I was about to turn off the tape, something strange caught my eye. In the corner of the frame, a dark shadow loomed, barely noticeable but undeniably there. My heart raced. I couldn't remember anyone being in that corner when the video was filmed. I rewound the tape, watching closely. The shadow moved slightly, shifting in and out of focus, its form indistinct and unsettling. Intrigued and unnerved, I decided to check the other tapes. Each one revealed more unsettling shadows, and some danced in the background of family dinners. Others hovered behind relatives as they laughed and celebrated. I felt a cold chill creep down my spine, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. The footage grew darker, the shadows more defined, and a creeping sense of dread began to seep into my bones. I had to know more. Who or what was this shadow? I spent days watching the tapes, my initial excitement fading into paranoia. The memories of my family seemed to twist into something sinister. I decided to invite my friend Lucas over, hoping his rational mind could help me make sense of the haunting footage. As he entered my apartment, I could see the worry etched on his face. "Evelyn, you've been acting strange since you found those tapes," he said, concern lacing his voice. I brushed it off, eager to share my discovery. "Look at this," I exclaimed, fast-forwarding to the most recent tape. The familiar laughter faded, replaced by an uncomfortable silence as the video flickered. Lucas squinted at the screen, trying to discern the shadow moving ominously behind my mother, who was smiling and waving at the camera. "Maybe it's just a trick of the light," Lucas suggested, his voice shaky. But deep down, we both felt it, a presence lurking just beyond our sight. Determined to uncover the truth, I dove into research about the house I grew up in. I scoured local archives, reaching out to neighbors who had lived in the area long before I was born. It turned out the land had a history. I had never known a family who had mysteriously vanished decades ago. Their home was said to be haunted, and whispers of strange occurrences lingered in the neighborhood. Each new piece of information only heightened my anxiety. The more I learned, the more convinced I became that the shadowy figure in the tapes was linked to the family that once lived in my home. That night, I decided to confront the darkness head-on. I set up the camcorder again, this time in the living room, pointing it at the very spot where the shadow had appeared. "Show yourself," I whispered into the empty room. The air felt thick, oppressive, as if something was watching me. My heart raced, the camcorder recording the silence as I waited for a response. Minutes passed, stretching into an eternity. Just as I was about to give up, a flicker of movement caught my eye. The shadow appeared again, more pronounced this time, gliding through the frame. Panic surged within me, and I stumbled back, barely keeping my focus on the screen. The figure drew closer, its shape more defined, revealing a silhouette of a person but distorted, as if it were made of smoke. It felt as if it was searching for something, no, someone. I froze, dread coursing through me. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice echoing through the empty house. The shadow paused, a flicker of recognition passing through its form. In a chilling moment of clarity, I felt an overwhelming wave of sadness emanating from the figure, as if it were trapped in a perpetual loop of despair. Suddenly, the camcorder flickered and the screen went dark. I scrambled to restart it, desperate to capture whatever was happening, but the tape had jammed. Frustration bubbled inside me, but more than that, fear settled in. The figure seemed to be warning me, urging me to remember something. I spent the next few days in a haze of fear and exhaustion, consumed by the mystery. Each night, I replayed the tapes, and each time, the figure seemed to grow closer, more desperate. I began to connect the dots. This was more than just a haunting, it was a plea for help. One night, as I watched the tapes, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In one clip, as my family gathered around the table, the figure hovered just behind my father. A reflection in the window revealed the name Eleanor etched into the glass, and the realization hit me like a cold wave. Eleanor was the name of the missing girl from the family who had once lived in this house. I dug deeper, uncovering more about Eleanor's story. She had vanished without a trace, her family leaving behind only whispers of tragedy. My heart raced as I realized the shadow wasn't a threat. It was a lost soul seeking closure. With a newfound determination, I decided to reach out to Eleanor to help her find peace. I returned to the living room, the camcorder ready, my heart pounding. "Eleanor," I said softly, "I know who you are. I'm here to help you." As the camera recorded, the shadows danced in the corners of the room. I felt a cold breeze swirl around me, and for a brief moment I could see her clearly, a young girl, her face filled with sorrow and longing. "Help me find them," she whispered, her voice barely a breath. Tears streamed down my cheeks as I promised. "I will. I promise to find your family." In that moment, I felt a weight lift, the shadows around me softening as Eleanor's presence began to fade. The following days were a whirlwind. I reached out to historians, local archivists, and even paranormal groups, sharing Eleanor's story. After weeks of research, I located a distant relative who had lost touch with the family years ago. We connected, and through our conversations, I learned the truth. Eleanor had been searching for her family, the connection severed by tragedy. With the help of her distant relative, we organized a small memorial honoring Eleanor and her family. To the moment we gathered at the house, I felt the energy shift, a calm enveloping the space. The shadows in the corners dimmed, and for the first time I felt at peace. As we paid our respects, I sensed Eleanor's presence one last time, a warm light enveloping me. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a gentle breeze, finally free to move on. The camcorder buzzed softly as the shadows dispersed, leaving behind a tranquil silence. My name is Derek Mason, and I've been a rideshare driver for over 2 years. It's a job that pays the bills, but after countless late-night rides, I've grown accustomed to the strange and sometimes eerie encounters that come with driving around town at odd hours. But nothing could prepare me for the night I picked up the unseen passenger. It was a chilly Friday night in late October when the request pinged on my phone. The map showed a location in a quiet neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, barely lit streets, and a creeping fog added to the unsettling atmosphere. I shrugged it off, eager for the fare and the thrill of the night. I arrived at the designated spot and waited, tapping my fingers on the steering wheel. After a few minutes, a figure finally emerged from the mist. They walked slowly, their hood pulled low over their face, obscuring their features. I felt a shiver run down my spine but brushed it off. After all, I was just here to drive. "Hey there," I said as they slid into the back seat, offering a polite nod. And silence enveloped the car, and I felt an unsettling tension. I glanced in the rearview mirror, hoping for a glimpse of the passenger's face, but their head remained down, hidden from view. "Where to?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Maple Drive," the passenger replied, their voice barely above a whisper. It was a cold, uninviting tone that sent chills down my spine. I programmed the address into my GPS and pulled onto the empty road. As I drove, I stole quick glances at the back seat, but my passenger remained silent, shrouded in darkness. An unsettling feeling lingered, as if the air thickened around us. As we made our way through the dimly lit streets, the fog thickened, and I felt the temperature drop further. I tried to make small talk, but every attempt was met with silence. My unease deepened, something felt off, almost otherworldly. Suddenly, the GPS chimed. "Arriving at your destination," it announced, pulling me from my thoughts. I glanced back to let my passenger know we were there, but the back seat was empty. Panic surged within me. Had I imagined them? I quickly pulled over, my heart racing, scanning the street for any sign of the hooded figure. But as I turned back to the seat, I noticed a crumpled piece of paper lying where the passenger had been. We picked it up, my hand shaking, and unfolded it cautiously. The handwriting was hurried and jagged. "They are coming for you. Don't trust the shadows." A cold shiver raced through my body. What did it mean? I looked around, half expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows of the trees lining the street. The fog swirled, swallowing the light from the street lamps and casting eerie shadows that seemed to dance around me. I shoved the note into my pocket, my instincts screaming to get out of there. I quickly restarted the car and pulled away, glancing in the rearview mirror one last time. The street behind me lay empty, but an uneasy feeling clung to me like a second skin. I decided to head home, my thoughts racing. The note consumed my mind. Who was the passenger? What did they mean by they? As I drove, the sense of being watched grew stronger, and I felt as if shadows were trailing behind me, clinging to my car. When I finally parked in my driveway, I felt an inexplicable weight settle over me. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me. The warmth of my small apartment was a comfort, but the feeling of dread lingered. I pulled out the note, studying it under the dim light of the kitchen. It was then I noticed something I hadn't seen before. In the corner of the paper was a faint drawing of a figure, a person with long limbs and an elongated head. My blood ran cold. This looked familiar. I had seen this figure in an urban legend I'd come across during my late-night web surfing. The shadow people, they were called entities said to lurk in the periphery of human vision, feeding off fear. They could manifest in different forms, often appearing in the dark or in reflections. I had laughed it off as mere folklore, but now the stories echoed ominously in my mind. That night, sleep eluded me. Every creak of the floorboard set my heart racing. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to rationalize it, but the feeling of dread was overwhelming. As dawn broke, exhaustion finally overtook me, and I drifted off to sleep, only to be jolted awake by vivid nightmares. I dreamt of dark figures lurking in the corners of my room, whispering my name, their voices merging into a cacophony of distorted sounds. I awoke in a cold sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The sun had barely risen, and I felt more exhausted than ever. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. I began noticing shadows in my peripheral vision, flickers of movement that vanished the moment I turned to look. Each night felt like a battle against the unseen, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for me. I had to face my fears. I decided to return to the spot where I had dropped off my passenger. Maybe I could find answers or even confront whatever was haunting me. As I drove through the fog-laden streets once again, my heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. When I reached Maple Drive, a sense of foreboding enveloped me. I parked the car and stepped out, feeling the chill seep into my bones. The street was empty, shrouded in mist, but I was drawn to a small park at the end of the road, a place where I had seen the hooded figure before. As I walked toward the park, I could hear whispers on the wind swirling around me. I hesitated, my breath hitching as I glanced around. "Show yourself," I called out, my voice echoing in the eerie silence. A moment later, the air shifted. The shadows began to swirl, forming a silhouette just beyond the trees. I could see it more clearly now, the elongated figure, just like the drawing on the note. My heart raced, but I held my ground. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, desperation creeping into my voice. The figure stepped closer, and I felt a wave of cold wash over me. "Help us," it whispered, the voice distorted yet familiar. It echoed the tone of my passenger, sending shivers down my spine. "Who are you?" I stammered, my resolve weakening. "I am a part of them," it replied, gesturing toward the trees. "The shadows that follow you. You can break the cycle." "Break what cycle?" I asked, confusion and fear warring inside me. "The cycle of fear. The darkness feeds on your fears, your doubts. You must confront it." In that moment, I understood. The shadow was not just a haunting figure, it represented everything I had avoided in my life, the fear of the unknown, the fears that plagued my nights. "Show me," I whispered, my voice barely audible. The figure reached out, and as it did, The shadows around me began to shift. I felt myself being pulled into the darkness, confronted by the very fears that had haunted me for so long. Memories flooded my mind, moments of loss, regret, and pain. I faced them, letting the emotions wash over me until they dissipated, replaced by an overwhelming sense of release. As I emerged from the shadows, the figure began to fade, its form lightening until it was nothing but a wisp of smoke. "Thank you," it murmured, its voice filled with gratitude. In the light of day, I felt a sense of peace enveloping me. The shadows no longer felt threatening. I returned to my car, heart lighter, the cryptic note still tucked in my pocket. I could finally move forward, unburdened by the fears that had held me captive. As I drove home, I looked back at the park, a sense of closure washing over me. The shadows had lifted, and I knew I would never forget the lessons I had learned that night. The figure in the fog had shown me that sometimes the darkest shadows only serve to remind us of our own light. If you want to see more horror stories, please like the video, share your thoughts, and subscribe to our channel. Stay with us, thank you, and see you in the next videos.